Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome and thanks so much for joining us. My name's Megan Kropp and I'm the Partnerships Manager for CESA Purchasing. We're the purchasing cooperative supporting schools throughout the state of Wisconsin. We're so glad that you could join us today for a discussion surrounding early childhood literacy. And I'm joined today by our partners from Hatch Early Learning. We've got Megan and Rachel who are going to lead our presentation today. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to the Hatch team so we can go ahead and dig in.
All right, sounds good. Thank you, Megan. So today we are here to talk about unlocking the science of reading, which entails early literacy success through online and print-based resources. So my name is Megan Hickey. I am the Senior Manager of Professional Learning at Hatch Early Learning. My role is to create content and support our training team in delivering the content that relates to our software solutions. So today specifically, we're going to talk about Key Foundations, which is one of our new products that we work with, as well as Ignite by Hatch. So our outcomes for today are to understand the importance of multimodal instruction, which sounds like a big fancy word, but we'll go over that with developmentally appropriate digital tools. We'll evaluate the effectiveness of literacy instruction using high quality tools and adjust teaching methods as needed to support optimal literacy growth in early education settings. We'll talk about the advocacy of incorporation of evidence-based literacy instruction, and then creating literacy-rich environments that nurture early learners' reading and language development. So it sounds like a lot in a very short amount of time, but I promise we'll get to all of it and it'll be much less confusing and overwhelming. So just to frame a little bit of our discussion and talk about some statistics. So around the topic of reading out loud, approximately 60% of children aged 3 to 5 are read to by a family member every day in the United States, according to the National Center for Education Statistics. So this number sounds really good, but also you consider the 40% of children who are not read to by family members each day. And we'll talk about why this is important in regards to the science of reading and literacy development. But hearing language and hearing words and connecting it to literacy is so critical in those early years, especially, but for child development overall. Then in regards to vocabulary development, by age 6, many children have a vocabulary ranging from 2,500 words to 5,000 words, although there can be a significant individual variation. So we see this across the country in different regions and different areas where that word gap that policymakers like to talk a lot about when they talk about early childhood can be really evident. So in low socioeconomic areas or different parts where there's childcare deserts in the country, those can impact that vocabulary development and already puts children behind just because of where they're born and where they're raised. Then in regards to phonemic awareness, which is one of the big parts of the science of reading, which we've heard all about and we'll talk about in a minute, according to the National Early Literacy Panel, about 20 to 25% of preschool age children may lack sufficient phonemic awareness skills, which are crucial for reading success. So again, we'll talk about those in a minute, but 1/4 of the children out there are already behind in this, and this is a critical skill to have for literacy development. And then letter recognition. So by the end of kindergarten, around 40% of children can identify most letters, according to the National Assessment of Educational Progress. And by the end of first grade, this number rises to 80%. So while that rise is really positive and really good, that the number doubles between kindergarten and first grade, that means that there's a significant gap in those 0 to 5 years that we're supporting children, and that they have to catch up. And even then, they're not catching up to 100%. So there's still that 20% gap of children. And again, it says identify most letters. So that's also an important point, that they can't identify all letters even by the end of first grade. And having it be 40% at kindergarten means they're behind in the expectations for reading, for writing, and for comprehension, not just when we're focused on literacy and that kind of block of work in the day, but think about how language impacts how you communicate in other subjects or in other environments. So something we need to work on. And then also we have to consider in our post-COVID landscape that we're in, Students are still reeling from the loss of learning, socialization, and other increased stressors related to the pandemic. And the National Reading Panel emphasizes the scientific evidence backing the importance of explicit and systematic phonics instructions in reading education. Educators moved to implement the science of reading in response to the pandemic learning gaps. So it's a good thing. We've heard a lot about the science of reading in recent times. There's all sorts of webinars and articles and different resources and supports for educators around this topic to make sure there's understanding. But we need to think about how children have, in our post-pandemic landscape, really adjusted and changed, and how having that time not in formal education, especially in the early years, we're seeing that impact carried out, and we'll continue to see that impact. So they're already at a disadvantage from those statistics that we talked about in the last slide. So people are using different science of reading techniques to try and catch kids up in a systematic way. And meanwhile, 70% of teachers agree that educational technology aids the teaching process and has a positive impact on their ability to teach. We live in a tech-savvy world. There's lots of tech out there. So having developmentally appropriate technology that also supports educators got a really good rating and response from educators, because there is that concern of, is there too much technology? Do we want technology in the classroom? But 70% was a reassuring number. Also, more than 75% of educators think that technology in early childhood education has a positive effect on student achievement. We're not going to change the reality, regardless of our personal feelings of technology with children. They grew up in a tech-savvy world, so they're going to have access to technology in one way or another, typically. And even those children that don't, there's still resources and things that can support them in developmentally appropriate ways. And then in 2019, so just if we're talking pre-COVID and post-COVID, pre-COVID found that 3 out of 5 educators wanted additional training to help incorporate technology more effectively into lessons. So we were already seeing kind of this increase in technology in the classrooms, and then the pandemic happened. So it just shot up even further because it was a way to effectively connect and encourage learning at home when teachers couldn't be physically with children in the classroom. So with all of that being said, we'll talk about some of the methodologies behind what Hatch is doing in regards to the science of reading and multimodal learning. So we'll talk in a little bit about the science of reading. I just want to touch upon here and show this pretty common image that we all see about how it's these different buckets regarding language comprehension and word recognition that blend together and support children's learning. And getting them to become skilled readers. And so it's an evidence-based method of teaching reading and writing, and it draws from psychology, linguistics, and neuroscience. So it's really focused on how children's brains work and how they learn. Then the other key component we're going to talk about is multimodal learning. So this is an instructional strategy that taps into the various sensory channels through which children perceive and interact with the world. So it's using multiple modes of learning. So you think of the big 3 buckets of, you have auditory learners, visual learners, and kinesthetic learners. And multimodal learning is something that approaches one topic from all different sources and all different types of learning to have that child understand that component that you're trying to teach them in a deeper way. So that's where having technology in your classroom and having literacy print-based resources is a great example of multimodal learning, because they can interact with the different skills in the technology as well as in the print-based resources. And so again, Hatch is an early learning technology solution company. So we have a number of solutions in different forms. So we have a whole class instruction, we have a social emotional learning table, and what we're talking about today is our Ignite program. So it's on tablets and it can be on a desktop. And for educators, it's important to know that we align to the Department of Education's Office of Educational Technology recommendations when we give recommendations for technology usage. So we don't want kids using screen time too much, but we want it in a developmentally appropriate way that enhances their learning. But here I kind of want to start with addressing some technology myths and realities. So the first kind of myth about technology in the classroom is it will fix all problems. If we just put children in front of a program, suddenly they're going to learn to read, write, count to 100, and do a science experiment. Not true. So, like all other curricular or classroom materials, it is a tool. It is one tool in your toolbox. And when we think of that multimodal learning image, it's just one vantage point of learning a topic. So it supports that child's learning. If it has the word education in it, it has to be educational. Also not true. So all educational technology tools are not created equal. So the unique part about Hatch is that we are developmentally appropriate and research backed. So we can show data and performance of children playing in our safe space and growing and learning and developing over time. Some apps and resources out there, children can get kind of in a rabbit hole, and that's what concerns educators and families, that they can start in a good space, but then end up in a different space. So it's important when you're selecting your tools that just because it says educational, you want to do your research and ask for results. Technology tools are meant to replace teacher-oriented instruction. No, teachers are still the primary teacher. Teachers should still be educating the children. Again, this is just one tool in the toolbox, and it's meant to support and help educators. So you can do, again, when we picture that multimodal learning, you can do the auditory instruction, you can do the hands-on support with children in the classroom. The technology just becomes an additional way for the child to access that learning point. Technology tools are isolating for children. They shouldn't be when implemented correctly. So you can have individual time on the technology, but you always want to bring it back into your classroom space. So you want to talk about what they played. A great tip I have for educators using Ignite is have the children recreate the game that they played in Ignite within the classroom space. So in the dramatic play area or in different centers in your classroom, recreate the game they played or talk about it or draw a picture or write a story about it. And it helps them connect that learning across. And then data from technology tools isn't effective. So sometimes people say it isn't effective or they feel overwhelmed by the amount of data that they're getting and don't know what to do with it. And so you want to ensure, again, when you're selecting a technology tool, that it supports and aligns with your assessment, your instruction, and your learning, and that you understand the data you're getting, which is critical. And I'll show you some Ignite data in a minute. So I'd like to start off with those myths and then facts, and then the challenges. Kind of talking about the more negative side of things or how people perceive technology. So the first challenge is budget, resources, and constraints. So there are partners in the field that can help you with budgeting and resources, but we do hear that many schools and districts find struggles with funding and resources to acquire and maintain the technology for their schools and their classrooms. So you can reach out to resources and support near you that can help you find that. Also lacking in professional development support for educators. So oftentimes in my role, because I primarily train educators in the classroom on how to implement our technology, what I find is that a leader or an organizational administrator says, we really want this technology. They understand it. They have all the conversations. And then they say, here, and they hand it to the teachers. And in my past life, I was a teacher for 10 years. And in that role, this happened to me all the time. We'd be handed new curriculums, new assessments, new resources without training. So when you consider that funding opportunity, you also want to consider getting training for your teachers so that they understand how to integrate it in their classroom, not just in that training moment, but how to really implement it throughout the entire school year to have that continuity of care for that product that you're implementing and that children understand how to use it and educators understand how to use it. And then having buy-in from schools, educators, and families. Oftentimes, I am very passionate about the family component. We forget about the families and their feelings about technology and their understanding of the tools. So make sure that all the stakeholders have buy-in here. Then too many technology options. There are so many options out there. Like I mentioned before, make sure you do your research. And in overcoming this challenge, make sure it aligns with your goals, that it's most appropriate, useful, and effective for your children. And then the excess in child screen time. So we know that too much screen time is harmful for children. So one of the key things with Ignite by Hatch, we only recommend 30 minutes a week to play to fidelity to get enough data to show child growth. So again, 30 minutes up front sounds like a lot, but it's not 30 minutes in a day. It's 30 minutes across a week. So 5 minutes or less a day, and you can meet that across a week because you can play at home and at school. So it's a minimal amount of time, 1 or 2 games at a time. Or if children are enjoying it and you want to set different recommendations based on the needs of your children, that's up to your program. And then you can have more data in there. So then the benefits. So we know that educational technology can have a lot of benefits when implemented correctly and supported correctly by the educators in the classroom. So it supports children's academic learning. So a developmentally appropriate tool can help children learn and practice a wide variety of academic and social and emotional skills across all of the domains of learning. And it also helps educators use their time and talent efficiently. So especially with something like Ignite, we provide a lot of planning and data for educators that I'll talk about in a minute, that helps you focus on what matters most, which is focused on the children. It also streamlines data collection and supports data-driven instruction. So instruction should always be based in data choices, not just on opinions or thoughts about where children are, but you should be able to track where their growth and development is heading, where there's successes, and where there's opportunities for improvement. And to do that efficiently takes a lot of time and effort for each individual child that's growing so rapidly. So that's where technology and education can help you track and support that. And then it enables children to build digital literacy and citizenship. So again, we live in a tech world. They're going to have tech at some point in their life if they don't already. So making sure that they know how to use it correctly and they understand it. So digital literacy specifically is the ability to use information and communication technologies to find, evaluate, create, and communicate information, requiring both cognitive and technical skills. And then citizenship refers to preparing children to be citizens in a digital world, the same way we teach them to be citizens in the real world. So this includes teaching children about access, privacy, safety, etc. So all the benefits of just having children use technology in safe and meaningful ways. And it's just engaging and exciting sometimes. Like our games, when we play them, are really fun. I have a lot of fun playing the games and showing, my nephews or my friends' kids how to play. And even when I'm at conferences, I'm the first one to jump on and play. It is just really fun and engaging for children in a different way than what's available sometimes in their classrooms. So here's a sample of what I was talking about with Ignite by Hatch. So this is our insights dashboard. So this is where teachers get all of their insights about a child's learning. So we have a number of reports here. You can see the screen. One specifically that's pulled out is the average demonstrated skill progress. So you can see, and we track for you by class and then by individual child, where they are across all of our domains of development and learning. So really great information to have as an educator, really important, and saves you so much time. These are all things you would track individually, but we have 7 domains of learning and development in Ignite. Children just play their quick games, and we're able to show you where they need support and where they're doing well in regard to kindergarten and first grade readiness. And then in addition, because we also want to acknowledge and recognize screen time limits, we don't want kids playing on Hatch all day, every day. We have what we call curricular experiences. So these are classroom activities, and you can see here, we give context, we give information, we give instructions. And this is aligned to the skills they're practicing in the Ignite games. So if we notice a child is struggling, we flag that for the educator and we say, hey, Megan is struggling in this specific concept. Here's a fully done lesson plan for you to do with Megan to help her out. Or if we notice Megan, Rachel, and Jamie are all struggling in the same skill, then we group those children together for you on a separate report and say, hey, here's a great activity to do with this small group of children to target skills that they're working on. So we do a lot of planning and information for you all through the tracking on this dashboard. And then, of course, we're here to talk about literacy. So highlighting our literacy components within Ignite. So we have our literacy domain and our language and communication domain, and it covers all of these topics. And we really focused on literacy learning in the updates of our games this round. And within our Hatch domains, what we cover in literacy is rooted in whole child development and aligned to curriculum and standards. So you can see we talk about listening and understanding, receptive language, vocabulary, academic vocabulary, conventions of language, phonological awareness, phonics, reading, listening comprehension, and writing. And then when you consider integrating technology in your classroom, just a couple of quick tips before we swap over to the print side of things. You want to familiarize yourself. So preview the content. You can play through the child games yourself as you go through Ignite and explore all of the things that you can find on Insights. Then you want to make plans for implementing the technology in your classroom. So when will it be available? Where will it be used? Who will be able to use it? And continue having a consistent feedback loop on how this works in your classroom. And then introduce it to the children. Oftentimes, again, how I mentioned how teachers are often handed resources and expected to implement, children are treated the same way. So take the time to make a big deal of it, make a show, have them introduce, pull away a curtain, make it exciting for them to learn more about this. And then have them partner with you to set rules and expectations and limits. And then for support, co-engage with children, talk about what they're doing, talk about what's happening. If there's any issues for educators or for children utilizing, you can troubleshoot and retrain, and then share the value with all of those stakeholders so they understand how children are progressing and what's happening. And now the science of reading. So we talked about kind of how literacy works within Ignite by Hatch, and then we'll talk about our print-based resource, Key Foundations. So Key Foundations is a separate print resource that ties into the beautiful story of how Ignite supports that whole child development, specifically within the literacy component. So in the recent years, as I mentioned, especially post-pandemic, the science of reading has gotten a significant attention from educators, researchers, and policy makers, although it's been a concept that's been around for a long time. And right now it's really a buzzword. So I kind of want to break it down a little more. And so, like I said, despite the fact that it has been around for decades, as research on how children learn to read, it's now being used to inform reading instruction in a global way. So it starts with decoding. So the ability to apply sound symbol relationships to read word, and then adding in language comprehension. So understanding spoken language equals that reading comprehension. So that ability to understand the meaning of text. And it's a structured approach, which is important because different literacy instruction techniques aren't as structured as the science of reading. And so the 7 key elements for literacy instruction, what's important here is typically when you look at science of reading articles, there are 5 components for literacy instruction. But what we've found with our research partners over at CodeEd, who helped us co-create Key Foundations, Joy Alcock is an amazing literacy expert in the field. And she actually considered 7 key elements for literacy instruction. So the first is listening, oral language, vocabulary, phonological and phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, and comprehension. So again, those additional 2 buckets outside of the standard 5 are really critical when we talk about Joy's research and how she explains the science of reading. So why are these foundational skills important? Why are these 7 key elements important? So when we're teaching students to read and write and spell, we're teaching them in an alphabetic language. And alphabetic languages are sound symbol languages. And the sounds of the language are written using the letters of the alphabet in various combinations. So we know this from any language development. And so as we move from a balanced literacy approach to teaching students to use word level knowledge as their first line of attack when reading and writing words, we must teach them to understand and use the alphabetic code. So I reflected on this when I met with Joy, that when I learned how to read and write, you were just handed a book and taught to sound out words. But what we worked with through understanding Joy's research and partnering with her is looking at how we teach the alphabetic code and get children to understand what the letters represent as far as sounds to teach them to read. And so some prerequisites for learning this code are understanding the alphabetic principle that the words we say are made of sounds, and these sounds are written with a letter or letters. Phonological and phonemic awareness skills, so that's the ability to identify, pronounce, and manipulate sounds and sound patterns in words. And alphabet knowledge, which is the ability to recognize and name letters and to link letters to sound and to write the letters of the alphabet. So all of that to say is it really gets into this sound to speech, the speech to sound to print approach. So what this is different than how we've taught literacy for many years. So again, as I said, I was handed a book and you were sounding out and reading, or you were said, copy the letter A, copy it 1,000,000 times on your piece of paper. What we're looking at now, and what's great about Key Foundations and how it supports this learning, is that it goes in the natural way that a child's brain processes and understands. So it starts with speech and understanding and hearing speech. So circling all the way back to that reading out loud and how children are read to at home by their families, not even close to 100%, they're not hearing that speech. So they're then not able to connect the sounds they're hearing to the print. So we were often going backwards in our teaching practices and starting with the print, then the sound, and then the speech, when it should be the other way around, because children are hearing language all day, every day. So that's naturally where they're going to start and then move into that print approach last. So it's kind of flipping how we've taught literacy on its head and starting in the natural progression. And so what we've found with this, and there is a research study done specifically for the practices done in Key Foundations. It was a Shine research project, and the results are amazing. You can find them on Hatch's website. But what we found is it really closes the reading gap. And so by implementing these practices effectively, educators can identify and support struggling readers early on. So rather than waiting till they're too far down the road in education and then backtracking, targeted interventions earlier are better. We know that from years and years of research. It also helps with teacher expertise. So these resources I'll talk about in 1 minute, they really focus in on not just supporting the children, but coaching the educators on what to look for and how to support this and prompting questions to get children to engage deeper and for educators to understand what they're doing. Then by using the science of reading, we can focus on individualized instruction, knowing that each child, especially in the early years, learns so differently, and you can tailor a lot easier with this approach and with Key Foundations to meet the specific needs of each student and keep them on track to where they need to be. And then, as we know, long-term success. So reading, as I mentioned earlier, impacts every other subject and every other aspect of life. If you can't comprehend the words that you're reading, when you're driving, when you're reading a menu, when you're reading a math problem in 4th grade, when they get to word problems, that's typically when we're able to identify a lot of reading issues with children, is when they start struggling in math or in science because they can't read instructions or comprehend instructions. But with implementing this approach, you can catch that a lot early on and close those gaps so they're successful later on. And so Key Foundations is our print-based resource, brand new, which is designed, as I mentioned, to teach students the foundational skills of reading and writing. So they're quick 10-minute lessons that you can apply at any point. They're interactive games. There's alphabet bops, which are little songs. There's alphabet practice books, and there's books for teaching decoding and text. It also, as I mentioned, has built-in teaching supports and cognitive and social skills. So the lesson books are 10-minute daily lessons, and there's 114 engaging lessons that focus on all of the components of early literacy success. And there's also English learner supports and teacher support materials. And then, as I mentioned, we have all the other resources. There's card games, there's guessing games, there's letter books, there's game books, there's those alphabet bops I mentioned that are songs, and then a variety of books that go through the decoding skills. And so where the alignment is that Ignite gives you all of this rich data on where children are while they're playing the games, specifically in the components of language and communication and literacy. From there, you can look at the data that you're getting on children as they play, notice where they're struggling, and pull activities and pull components from Key Foundations toolkit that you get and plug those in to support that specific skill and catch that child back up to where they need to be. And so we have some resources on our website. Myself and my colleague, Kylie Rymanowitz, wrote some articles on unpacking both the science of reading and nurturing literacy with Hatch Early Learning, combining Key Foundations and Ignite, and how that story really is told in the literacy journey of a child. So check those out on our website. And otherwise, thank you so much for having us today. I hope this was helpful. And I know we're 1 minute over, so if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Yeah, thank you so much, Megan. That was really, really interesting. And I mean, I'm not even really in the educational space. I'm in the cooperative purchasing space, and that was really interesting to me as well. So thanks so much for the time.
Well,
I'll be sending out a follow-up, and I would think the Hatch team will be sending one out as well, with the recording and, information on how to learn more with them. And I can send some information about our partnership and contract with them as well, since they're partners with our purchasing program. So I appreciate everybody's time.
yeah, absolutely. And if there's any questions, feel free to reach out to us.
Cool. Thanks, guys.
Thank
Have a
you.
good night, everybody. Thanks.